Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast. In this episode we'll be looking at the story of King Lear and what happens in each act of the play. I've said before that the opening of Shakespeare's plays repay close reading. Shakespeare takes a lot of care over the opening of his plays, and King Lear is no different. So Act 1, Scene 1 is about the abdication of the king and the marriage of Cordelia. However, before the grand scene opens, there is a conversation between the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, and the Duke of Gloucester's illegitimate son, Edmund. At the opening of the play, it's difficult to see the significance of this conversation, but the further the play goes on, the more important this opening becomes. Kent asks Gloucester if he is being accompanied by his son, and Gloucester introduces Edmund as his, quote, whoreson, and says, quote, there was good sport at his making. Kent and Edmund brush over these comments under the guise of courtly politeness, but Edmund is a grown man who is being introduced to the court, in this case in the person of Kent, as the son of a whore. There are three important things to mention about this opening conversation. The first is the sheer casual cruelty of Gloucester's remarks, which sets the tone for the whole play. It's Gloucester who calls Edmund a knave, who says that he came saucily into the world. The second is the question of Edmund's legitimacy and the whole idea of inheritance, upon which the plot of the play turns. Edmund cannot inherit because his mother was not married to his father, whereas Cordelia cannot inherit because she is disinherited by her father. Thirdly, this sets up the generational friction between the old men, Lear and Gloucester, and their children, who are of a younger generation. Right at the opening of the play, we can see that the older generation is not very kind to the younger generation. Having been given this information, the grand scene begins with the entrance of Lear and his daughters and his two sons-in-laws, the Duke of Cornwall and the Duke of Albany, with attendants. Lear makes a speech about his intention to give up the throne and divide his kingdom between his three daughters, and he asks each of them to say how much they love him. Goneril and Regan both say they love their father very much and receive a third of the kingdom. Shakespeare suggests that they are being insincere in their protestations of love by having Cordelia make comments to herself as asides. When it's Cordelia's turn to profess her love, she says she has nothing to say, which prompts King Lear to remark, "Nothing will come of nothing, speak again." It is a remark that will haunt King Lear for the rest of the play. Cordelia refuses. Lear tries to threaten her and bully her into flattering him, but Cordelia points out that if her sisters love him so much, it doesn't reflect very well on their husbands. So Lear disowns Cordelia in the harshest terms. The Duke of Kent, the king's counsellor, tries to intervene on behalf of Cordelia, but is banished from Lear's kingdom. Goneril and Regan, and by extension their husbands, Albany and Cornwall, get the part of the kingdom that Cordelia should have received, and Cordelia is now to be married off without any dowry at all, to either the Duke of Burgundy or the King of France. Lear is equally brutal to these two suitors. He tells them that as far as Cordelia is concerned, quote, her price is fallen, and adds, take her or leave her. The Duke of Burgundy basically says, I'm very sorry, but I can't marry you if you don't have any money. It's not personal, it's business. To which Cordelia says she's not offended at all. The King of France takes a different view and says of Cordelia, quote, she is herself a dowry, and he decides to marry Cordelia despite the fact that she has been disowned by her father. Exit Lear and the court. King of France tells Cordelia to say goodbye to her sisters. And interestingly, Cordelia says to Goneril and Regan, quote, "I know you, what you are." But Regan and Goneril respond by saying, well, who really cares what you know, because you don't have anything anyway. The King of France and Cordelia leave, and the scene ends with Goneril and Regan discussing what they should do next. They agree that their father is becoming old and foolish. As Regan says, quote, "He hath ever but slenderly known himself," meaning he's always been a bit potty. And they agree that they need to work together to get rid of the last vestiges of their father's power and authority so that they can control the whole kingdom. It is striking that Goneril and Regan start plotting against Lear as soon as they get their inheritance. It's almost as if they cannot wait to get their hands on the levers of power. That's what happens in Act 1, Scene 1. It's an action-packed scene with lots happening and a lot for the audience to digest. The speed at which the plot unfolds is fast, even by Shakespeare standards. So Shakespeare's about to do what he does best. He's going to turn up the heat. In Act 1, Scene 2, it starts with Edmund alone on the stage, and he has a 22-line speech, which is some of the finest writing in the whole of Shakespeare's works. Now, if we thought Goneril and Regan were insincere and calculating, Edmund is full-on evil. But the reasons why he's going to trick his father into disowning Edgar so that he can get everything are perfectly understandable. Is it right that Edgar should get everything and Edmund gets nothing just because he's illegitimate? "Why bastard?" asks Edmund. "Wherefore base?" And what do these words mean anyway? Well, Edmund's not going to stand for it. He's going to do what he can to inherit everything. He's going to overthrow the established order for his own personal gain. The final line of the speech is a rallying cry for revolution. Quote, "Now, gods, stand up for bastards." We can imagine the Jacobean peasants at the front of the stage in the Globe Theatre cheering Edmund on, whilst the wealthier parts of the audience in their private boxes start to feel uncomfortable. Enter Gloucester. Edmund pretends to hide a letter, which his father demands to see, and Edmund reluctantly gives it to him, which makes it look as if Edgar is the one plotting against his father. Gloucester immediately believes that his son would kill him to inherit his dukedom. First, Edmund tricks his father and then his brother into believing that there is a quarrel between them. Edmund tells Edgar to turn up at his lodgings armed with a sword. Act 1, Scene 3, Goneril is talking to a steward, Oswald, about her father's behaviour. Lear's supposed to be a guest in her house, but he's already causing trouble. It's obvious that Lear is a difficult parent, and Goneril considers it unreasonable that her father behaves as if he's still the king when he's not. Act 1, Scene 4, enter Kent in disguise, who joins the service of Lear even though he's no longer in power. Kent is the moral centre of the play, who does his duty to his master despite being banished on pain of death. As the scene develops, we see Lear behaving badly, and the servants no longer doing what he tells them to do. Enter the fool, who makes fun of Kent and calls Lear a fool, for Lear asks why he calls him a fool, and the fool says, "All thy other titles thou hast given away." The fool explains to Lear in riddles how giving away his kingdom was a mistake. Enter Goneril, who is unhappy with Lear's behaviour and the behaviour of his retinue. She points out that, quote, "Your old licensed fool" is a good example of this. Goneril says that Lear's knights have turned her palace into a tavern or a brothel. Lear flies into a rage and calls to leave. He curses her to have a sterile womb and says that, quote, "sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child." Lear leaves, Goneril's husband Albany seems to have no idea what's going on, which will of course become important later. In Act 1, Scene 5, Lear tells Kent to go and see Gloucester with some letters, and Lear tells us that he intends to go to his other daughter's house, Regan, where he expects to be treated much better. But the scene ends with the fool making fun of Lear. He asks Lear why a snail has a shell, and says, quote, not to give it away to his daughters, and that, if Lear were the fool, he would beat him, because Lear is old without being wise. And the act ends with Lear and the fool sat alone together on the stage. If you enjoy this kind of thing, why not like or subscribe to this channel and get much more of this kind of thing. And so Act 1 ends with Lear storming out of Goneril's palace and vowing to go to stay with Regan. Act 2 opens with Edmund's plot to disgrace his brother and become heir to a dukedom. Curran, the servant, tells him the Duke of Cornwall is on his way, and that relations between Cornwall and Albany are strained. Edmund uses this information to his advantage to tell Edgar that if things were bad before with his father, now they're even worse because the Duke of Cornwall is after him. Edmund injures himself to convince his father that Edgar was out to kill him, that Edmund has saved his life, and that Edgar has fled. Gloucester calls his legitimate son Edgar a villain and says that he'll get Cornwall to help him kill Edgar. Enter Cornwall and Regan, who say they've heard about the whole Edgar thing, and Gloucester's lucky to be alive. Good job Edmund was there to save the day. That Edgar dude has been hanging out with Lear's knights, is what I heard, says Regan, and my sister Goneril has told me what they're like, so it's no wonder Edgar has turned into a murderous villain. Anyway, Cornwall and Regan have left home to avoid Lear, and they need Gloucester's advice on some important matters of state. Act 2, Scene 2, Kent fabricates an argument with Oswald and attacks him. Enter Edmund, Cornwall and Regan, who decide Kent is one of those followers of King Lear who are always causing trouble, and they put him in the stocks as a punishment. It is made clear to us that this is a slight on King Lear himself. Gloucester says he'll try and help the disguised Kent, but it is Cornwall's decision, and you know what the Duke of Cornwall's like, he doesn't take any nonsense. The scene ends with Kent disguised as a peasant in the stocks and a speech about how times have changed. The Duke of Kent is in the stocks. He falls asleep and in comes Edgar, heir to a dukedom, saying that everyone's out to kill him, so he's going to change his identity to that of a beggar and call himself Poor Tom. Edgar exits, enter Lear, fool, and a gentleman. They find Kent in the stocks. Lear says, "Is this a hobby of yours?" And Kent says, "It's your daughter and son-in-law that put me in here." Lear refuses to believe him at first, but exits to try and find out what's been going on. Kent says the fool talks nonsense, and the fool says, "Well, I'm not the one who's in the stocks, mate." Enter Lear and Gloucester. Lear is confused. He wishes to speak with Cornwall and Regan, his daughter, but they're refusing to speak to him. In modern parlance, they're not taking his calls anymore. Lear asks Gloucester, "Dost thou understand me, man?" And then adds, "The king would speak with Cornwall." Lear has still not understood that times have changed because he has no power. he is no longer treated with respect. This has never happened to him before, so he doesn't know what it is that's actually happening. Finally, after much discussion, Gloucester goes and gets Regan and her husband Cornwall, and they finally make an appearance. Lear says Goneril treated him badly, and Regan says, "She told me all about it. Your followers behaved badly, and you did nothing about it. Now you need to go back to Goneril and apologise to her." Lear says that he will not do it, and he curses Goneril. Regan says that you'll do the same to me when it suits you, but Lear begins to say that Regan is much better than Goneril when the trumpet sounds and enter Goneril. But of course not Albany, her husband. Lear says, "There she is, she kicked me out." But Goneril defends herself and says, "I gave you no offence, I complained about your followers." Regan suggests that Lear is old, doesn't know what he's doing, and he should just go back to Goneril's house for the rest of the month and then come to her house, only without his followers. Lear rejects the offer, and there's a negotiation takes place between Lear and Goneril and Regan, where they whittle down his numbers of followers from 100 to 50 to 25, until at last Regan says, "What needs one?" In most productions, Regan is pointing at the fool when she says this. Lear realises the position that he's in. It's one of impotency, but he vows vengeance on both of them. He calls them, quote, "unnatural hags." The storm is brewing outside. It's starting to rain. Lear decides to take his chances with the elements, but he is obviously frightened by his predicament. He worries that his mind will give way, as he says, "This heart shall break into 100,000 flaws, or ere I'll weep, O fool, I shall go mad." Lear storms out, and Goneril and Regan say they're sad to see the old man go, and they'll put Lear up in their homes, even after all the name-calling, but not any of his followers. The scene ends with Regan and Cornwall saying, "The storm's coming, shut up all the doors." So now Cornwall, Regan and Goneril are on the inside, and Lear, the fool and Kent are on the outside. Act 3 opens with Kent giving instructions to a gentleman to go to the port of Dover in the south of England, because Cordelia is there with the King of France. And he's to tell them what's been happening. And here, says Kent, is a ring that Cordelia will know who sent you. In the next scene, Lear and the fool enter. Lear's ranting at the storm as the fool tells him that they should go back to their daughter's house and get under cover. In modern parlance, Lear is basically like an old man stood on a street corner shouting at the traffic. Kent arrives and leads them to a hovel, which at least gives some shelter, and the fool has a joke about how Merlin will prophesy, because of course he comes before Merlin, so Merlin can say what will happen in the future. In the next scene, Gloucester and Edmund enter. Gloucester says he's not happy about how things have changed, and despite the Duke of Cornwall telling him to avoid King Lear, Gloucester feels that he must help the king, and he's received some sort of a letter that's full of secret information that he's locked in his closet. Unfortunately for Gloucester, he tells Edmund his plans, and as soon as Gloucester exits, Edmund said that he's going to betray his father to the Duke of Cornwall. The reason for this, according to Edmund, is, quote, "The younger rises when the old doth fall." In the next scene, Lear, the fool and Kent are about to enter the hovel. Lear admits that as king he hasn't given much thought to those people, those of his subjects who live in poverty. At this point they come upon Edgar as Poor Tom. Poor Tom is possessed by, quote, "foul fiends," but most of his ranting relates to being cold and hungry. Lear decides that he's been brought to this by his ungrateful daughters. and Lear reflects that man is, quote, such a poor, bare-forked animal as thou art. Enter Gloucester, who poor Tom, Edgar disguised as poor Tom, says is the fiend Flibbertigibbet. Gloucester has come to bring the king to where there is fire and food. Gloucester, not realising who he's talking to, mentions both Kent and Edgar, who are there with him, but in disguise. Gloucester convinces them to find shelter with him, and they all exit together. Act 3, Scene 5, Edmund has sold out his father, and the Duke of Cornwall is mad. The top secret letter was from the King of France, which makes Gloucester a traitor. Whatever else happens, Edmund is now the Earl of Gloucester, and Edmund's plan has worked. He's got everything he always wanted. In Act 3, Scene 6, Lear, the fool, Kent and Edgar, disguised as poor Tom, come to a warmer place. Here, Lear organises a mock trial of his daughters. Edgar tells us in an aside that he is so moved by Lear's plight that it's interfering with his disguise as poor Tom, letting the audience know that he's only pretending to be a beggar possessed by demons. Lear becomes tired and goes to sleep on a litter bed. Enter Gloucester, who warns that there is a plot to kill the king, and they must leave at once and go to Dover to meet up with Cordelia and her husband, the King of France. Gloucester, Kent and the fool carry Lear out while he's sleeping, and Edgar has a speech to say that Lear's plight has put his own troubles in their proper perspective. Act 3, Scene 7, enter Cornwall, Regan, Goneril, Edmund and servants. Cornwall is preparing for war. The French have landed at Dover. They seek the traitor Gloucester, who has helped Lear escape. Cornwall sends Edmund and Goneril off, so that he won't see his father's treatment once he's been captured. They've hardly gone when the servants arrive with Gloucester, who they tie to a chair and torture. After some infighting with the servant, not only did they gouge Gloucester's eyes out, but they also tell him about Edmund's treachery. Too late, Gloucester learns that he has been tricked and that Edgar is innocent. Cornwall and Regan exit to take care of Cornwall's wounds, and the scene ends with the servants discussing how bad things have got, and they make plans to help, quote, the old Earl. Now heaven help him, says one of them. And this scene ends with a brutal torture scene, Gloucester's discovery of his mistake, and the only nice people in the story are the servants. It's a lesson worth learning. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Shakespeare Podcast.